Good morning. It's good to see everyone here. A little quieter than normal with it being rainy out. Everyone's kind of in that relaxed mood this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started by wrapping up Daniel chapter 5 and getting into chapter 6. So, if you recall, we wrapped up our discussion really of the text in Daniel chapter 5 last week. And I challenged you to go and look at the design of the chapter 5, having a chiastic structure, one of those where as the story progresses and it reaches a critical point in the middle of the narrative by mirroring all that started the story as you start to leave the story. As we go in, we see things parallel to the very end of the story, and as we get to the middle, mimic each other in some way. So, what happens first as we open up Daniel chapter 5? Let's start building this chiastic structure. What's taking place? Yeah, the king is hosting a banquet or a great feast, right? And so we see the story open with this great feast in chapter 5 and verse 1. What happens next? What does the king do? Jai? Tap the button on the bottom there. Okay, what were you saying? I'll repeat it.
There it goes. It's a technical error. He's holding a feast in his kingdom, and he's talking about all this of his greatness.
Okay, that Nebuchadnezzar does that in chapter 4, goes around talking about all his greatness. Here in chapter 5, though, Belshazzar gives a command to bring the temple vessels in to be able to feast with those, right? To party with the vessels that were brought to this land by his father, Nebuchadnezzar. Once that happens, what appears next? The fingers writing on the wall, right? And so God writes a message on the wall using the hand. Okay? Of course, the king is distraught over this. We see this as we go into the response here. But as he does that, he brings in all these wise men of Babylon, right? He brings all these wise people in to try to answer, what is this thing that has happened? What's the interpretation of this writing on the wall? Of course, no one can interpret it. And so what happens next? The queen comes in, and the queen is going to advocate for the abilities of Daniel. The queen comes and says, this is the man you need to turn to. And so what happens? I'm sorry? Yeah, Belshazzar calls in Daniel now. So where he called in the wise men of Babylon, now he is bringing in Daniel under the advisement of the queen. Okay, what happens next? Daniel interprets the dream. Daniel delivers the message that was intended by the writing on the wall. Of course, what does Belshazzar do with that? Thanks. And he makes the command to elevate Daniel as a result, right? So we see a command given at both ends of the book, and then finally Belshazzar dies after the feast, right? Or at the end of the narrative. So what's the central point in this design of the text? I just lost the word. It's going to be one of those mornings. In the chiasm structure, what is the central part of the story? Jai?
Don't defy God.
Okay, let's look at it specifically. If we take this and make it more looking like the chiasm, what is the central point in the story? What changes the narrative here? It's the queen. It's the queen who recognizes God and God's people that then is the one who turns the narrative in this story. So while we often would say, well, Daniel gave the interpretation and Belshazzar reacts, what the author's wanting us to look at is the queen's impact in this. Thoughts on that? What is he pointing out here? I see some whispering. I want to know. Robin, I like it. Listen to your mother. Yes, there is a bit of that. Go ahead.
I see this whole thing. God is just revealing himself. He's revealing himself to these what is considered foreign kings, but he's making it known that they're his kings. And he's made it, he makes it clear. I put you there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really putting the importance on seeing God at work, and he's using multiple people to bring about his work, right? We often say, well, Daniel's the main character here. I think we've seen multiple times that Daniel is just the one that is brought in to be the voice of God. He's not always the one who was at the right place at the right time to have the right thing to say to make a difference. It was God working through other people, and we'll go back after chapter 7 and look at all the chiasms in line and see kind of the narrative that's built that supports that. It's all of God's work through various people in this story. Kay, you had a thought there, I think.
I think they covered everything. Thank you.
Great. I saw Scott's face about ready to make a comment here. Y'all have certain looks when you're about ready to say something, so.
I'll have to see that one.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that's brought up because God's speaking to the world, not just his people, right? His people didn't follow him the way that they should have. That is a message to the world. And now the queen of another nation, like was brought up, is seeing who God is. So along with all those comments, that fits. But it's just neat to see that, God isn't aiming to just look at one people. He's trying to convince the world of who he is.
Yeah.
And that's neat that's being done here in a way that throughout the story, you see individuals getting who God is the right way.
Absolutely.
Because of what's going on.
Yeah. I might also say some other thoughts I had when contemplating this. Is this a foreshadowing that through a woman, the answer would come, right? That through Mary, the birth of Jesus would come, and that would be what would give. I mean, we see women used throughout as a theme that God would use these women to fulfill his plan. So there's that. Was there anything else? I think I saw a hand. Michi.
Yeah, I don't know if it's super on topic, but like in the beginning we're designed as helpers. And even though we see like the men have the kings and it's the kings this, the kings that, like women still do have a strong influence, even though it's a little bit more silent and we're kind of working behind the scenes and in the shadows. And I think that's still just because it's not as glorious as a king, or even like how Mordecai was in Esther, Esther still had a big role in advocating for that too. Mm-hmm. And it goes both ways, that we have very different roles as men and women, but equally as important to fulfill God's will.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that in how this might be a reflection of the power of the church, that we are the bride, the woman that would carry the message out. And so here's the image of the church delivering a message to the people that need to hear it. And we're seeing it rejected in this case. And judgment comes to them. I mean, there's all sorts of, I think there's thematic ideas here. And we would miss that if we didn't stop and look at the chapter as a whole and see the design. Also, could it be that he's reminding us that the woman will crush the head of the serpent? And so the wisdom of the queen here is, and the calling on God is overpowering the wickedness of the king? Who knows? but I think it's there. So, chapter 5. Any final thoughts on chapter 5? Miss Kay.
Well, before he interprets what he interprets, he goes through all that Nebuchadnezzar had gone through and finally acknowledged God, and he tells Belshazzar, though you knew all this, but you have not lifted your, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven.
Yes.
So he reproves him before he interprets the dream.
And it highlights that even though he listened to his mother and did the action she told him to do, he didn't really listen to his mother and listen to the message that came with what she told him to do, right? Yeah. So we can listen and obey without hearing the full message. And Nebuchadnezzar, or Belshazzar's problem is that when the message was delivered, it was clear that his pride was too powerful for him to hear what Daniel and what God was trying to deliver to him. All right. Quick cleanup. Last week at the end of class, there was some discussion over Belshazzar and Darius the Mede. So I wanted to clean up some information on that. We won't go too deep archaeologically, but I want you to know that there are resources out there that prove the validity of what's happening both at the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6. So, let's talk about first Belshazzar. For centuries, historians would have claimed that there was no proof that Belshazzar ever held a position and that he was ever a real person in the kingdom of Babylon. In fact, they would say, based on the historical evidence they had at the time, was, I believe as Mark pointed out to us when he opened chapter 5, was Nabonidus, was the last known official king of Babylon. Well, as we were reminded at the beginning of chapter 5, Belshazzar is the son of Nabonidus. How do we know that? Well, this little thing called Nabonidus cylinder. There have been multiple that have been found at the sites that are scattered around Babylon and the surrounding area, and various ones talk about various details about what is going on at the time of Nabonidus, the known official king of Babylon when Babylon falls. Okay? In this one, we have this inscription. As for me, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, save me from sinning against your great Godhead and grant me as a present a lifelong of days. And as for Belshazzar, the eldest son of my offspring, instill reverence for your great Godhead in his heart, and may he not commit any cultic mistake. May he sated with a life of plenitude. This scroll was found in 1854, along with 3 others, in the ancient city of Ur, which is also the area surrounding Babylon. And so here we have Nabonidus' own records of what's going on in his kingdom. He cries out to his God at the time and says, grant that my son would not do anything against you, O great God. Now, this is not the Most High God he's calling out to. It's his God. Okay? So we have Nabonidus claiming Belshazzar as king, as his son, right? And we actually have then more context that we can turn to, in that there is what is also called the verse accounts of Nabonidus. Here it's more in tablet form, but it is his official records that were made at the time. I believe both of these are at the British Museum, so if you want to go overseas and check all this out, you can see it, right? You can go look at these things. Of note on this, on the verse accounts of Nabonidus, here he's talking about the king was entrusted the royal power to his son Belshazzar. So this is in column 2, line 18 of the tablet. And he goes on in various other positions to state that his son Belshazzar is taking over as king. Now, other proofs that we found archaeologically show that Nabonidus is leaving Babylon to go to do his own thing, and so he's leaving Belshazzar in control. Okay? So all this has happened as around the early to mid 1800s. All of these tablets and cylinders were found. So, with those alone, we get archaeological proof Belshazzar was a person who actually existed, and that he was given control of the kingdom of Babylon. Now, he wasn't the ultimate control. He was left as second in charge, but he did have the right to reign in Babylon, and it would be under his fall that Babylon would be meeting its demise. All right, questions about Belshazzar or any of these cool little findings they've got? Okay, again, you can go look up these things, and there is plenty more to be read on what is said in them, and you can go look at more information. Yes?
Something that Aaron mentioned to me a while back is that this is why whoever interprets this would be the third in command.
Right.
Because you have these two kings.
Right, which is, and your reference there is to Belshazzar's promise to Daniel and to the wise men in Daniel chapter 5, that if they could interpret it, they would be third in charge. Well, because Nabonidus is officially prime, number 1. Then you have Belshazzar, number 2. So the greatest power he can give is number 3, unless he wants to dethrone himself, which king would do that? Okay, but Belshazzar is not the only king that is mentioned, or power that is mentioned at the end of chapter 5. Who else is mentioned? Darius the Mede. Now, let's talk about Darius the Mede, because there are artifacts that have been found and writings that we have that support who Darius the Mede is, because the known written Darius of the Medes and the Persians was Darius the Great. But he comes many years later. Okay, he is not in power at this time. And so many have said, see, again, the Bible has problems. There's Darius, and Darius the Great rules later. There's no way he could have been ruling at this point. Thank goodness that God has seen fit to give us artifacts that help to go, nice try. Let's try again. Again, a Nabonidus cylinder of all things. Nabonidus, the king of Babylon, is writing about all the things he's doing to rebuild the temples of these various gods on the cylinder. And so he's building the pagan temples in Haran. And almost as an aside, it's just like this subscript. Like, it's a useless point, but I'm going to throw it in there so that you have context for what's going on. He says, at the beginning of the 3rd year, they arouse him, Cyrus, the king of Anson, his second in rank. He scattered the vast Median hordes with his small army. All right, so here we have confirmation that Cyrus is really leading the charge, or is kind of in control of the king of Asan, who then becomes the king of the Medes and the Persians. Why is this important? Well, because we get writings from Josephus. Now, Josephus doesn't write until almost 500 or 600 years later, but through his knowledge of what took place, he has this writing that he puts in one of his books. But when Babylon was taken by Darius, and when he, with his kinsman Cyrus, had put an end to the dominion of the Babylonians, he was 62 years old. He was the son of Astyages, and had another name among the Greeks. Moreover, he took Daniel the prophet and carried him with him into Media, and honored him very greatly and kept him with him. For he was one of the 3 presidents whom he set over his 360 provinces, for into so many did Darius part them. All right? What's happening here is Josephus has confirmed that Darius, not Darius the Great, but a Darius of the family lineage that links him to Cyrus, is second in command with Cyrus in this attack on Babylon. And so we have Cyrus, who's the confirmed known conqueror of Babylon, and his second in command is Darius. So God uses both second in commands to complete the narrative here. What do you make of that? What do you make of that? Partly maybe because the lesser is greater. I think partly there. For me, I was thinking about it and seeing how God had used the second with Jacob, right? To bring about his great nation and to bring about his promises. You see that you have multiple situations where God uses the latter to create what he is preparing for. And so in this case, he's using the second in command. And of course, we know that the first covenant is beautiful and wonderful and has power and is all that it was meant to be. But it's ultimately his second covenant that he brings forth and works his plan through. Is this a foreshadowing of or a paralleling of the idea of the second is being used to do what God needs to do in this world? Possibly. There might be something there. But at minimum, we have confirmation that both Belshazzar and Darius the Mede are real people who had control over each of these Babylonian and Mede-Persian empires to some degree. And these are the stories that we're reading in Daniel chapter 5 and chapter 6 help to add context to what takes place there. Questions, thoughts, anything there? Cool. Hope that was helpful. Dave.
Well, looking at the whole picture, for me,
Sure.
It's abundantly apparent that Belshazzar did not tell Darius anything about anything because he was dead.
Right.
So what I'm seeing here, you asked the question, why did he pick the second in command? I think the theme has been how easily influenced with pride and whatever, to get these guys to do things. And so I think that's what it is. He's no different than you or me or anybody else. If somebody butters you up enough, sometimes we tend to fall for that.
Sure.
And, and we're influenced by it. And this shows us the dangers of listening to men and women to try to convince and influence us. We need to look to the Word of God to be influenced by that, our decisions making.
Yeah.
And that's why Daniel went and prayed and prayed. And when they heard about it, what did they do? Let's sign an injunction to get rid of, all
which is where we're heading next.
Are you serious? Yeah. And this guy signed it. What an idiot.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, when I see that, I say this guy's weak.
Yeah. We see God showing his power that even over strong kingdoms and strong commands of armies and nations, that he can work his power and pull down any pride that's in man. And it's a sign of warning to us to watch our pride and make sure that we're being more like the queen and Daniel and all these others who continued to point to and look to God for their strength. Mark?
Like you cite, Nabonidus is out of the picture from Babylon. And so the Jews see Belshazzar as their king.
Yes.
Even though he's the second guy. He still has equal power. He's equal in every way. So they call him the king. And it's much the same, not exactly the same, because this is a human thing, but Jesus and God.
Okay.
Jesus is now the guy who reigns. We see Jesus as the one who reigns.
Yes.
Is there God, still Jehovah God?
Yes.
And this is a spiritual matter of, we can't understand everything about it.
Sure.
But yes, Jesus does reign.
Yeah.
And in much the same way. He's equal power, equal authority, and it is a projection to me as far as what's coming.
I hadn't even gone there. And so that's beautiful in that as we're watching the narrative of Daniel unfold, the message that is being built is the idea that God is establishing a kingdom that will last forever. He's a king over all that is and was and is to come, and all these ideas of his supremacy. And yet, when he puts a second in command to reign as king, he's infallible. That his second in command king, who is also equal in power and authority, right? He still reigns and is not going to be taken down. He is going to reign in all of his righteousness. So, yeah, good. I like that. I like that. All right, let's get into chapter 6. We won't get very far today, I'm sure. But let's open up chapter 6 then and see what Darius does after conquering Belshazzar. All right, Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." All right? Take a moment to mark that up, and then we'll talk about it. All right, what do we notice here, or what questions do you have? Jai?
So all the other men didn't like that that Daniel was going to be set over the whole kingdom. So they're looking to knock him down or to take him from that high place, and they can't find anything wrong because of Daniel's faith.
Yeah. And we see then this narrative that the people of the kingdom are upset when an outsider is brought in and given glory. Right? Is this not? Say what? Jealousy reigns. Absolutely. And it reigns in the Jews at the time of Christ, doesn't it? This is exactly how mankind operates. This is my kingdom. This is what I was born into. This is what I deserve. And you cannot come in and be a part of that and take what I rightfully have earned by birth. Jealousy reigns. Pride reigns, right? And so, yeah, they get jealous. And so they look for a reason to go against Daniel. What else do we notice here? Dave.
I appreciate Betty saying that. That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
But also, or not but also, don't you find it odd that they all met together and decided together without the actual guy who makes a decision called the king? I found that to be seditious, at best.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing that they did that, because when they said, "Oh, King, sign this," they're telling him. They're not asking him.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and you bring up a good point. It was no small gathering of the people that were gathering to try to get Daniel off the throne, right? Off his pedestal.
What does that remind you of? It reminds you of Jesus and the Jews. They all conspired against him.
Yeah.
Got the people all upset.
Their
and
leaders.
That's
Yep.
right. And went to the Romans. So it's just amazing to me that there's no new thing under the sun.
Yeah, excellent. What else do we have here? Michi?
I like, it says that, it says he has an extraordinary spirit, and he's, appointed by God. And Jesus says if they treat you bad, it's because of me. They hated me first. And I know the New Testament came later, but
Sure.
I think it still rings true that they may not be able to see what they see. They just see something, and we know what that is because we carry that spirit. And
Right.
I think it rings true that it's not us, it's God's spirit that they see.
Yeah.
And that's highlighting this, or bringing light to whatever darkness they have, which is why we're here to help, But in this case, they're like, no, we don't like this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, normally, how would you act if you find someone that you go, that's a genuinely good person? I don't know what it is about them, but I really like their spirit. I like their vibe. I like their personality. What do? I want you to be my friend. I like this. This is good for me. And yet when jealousy reigns and they are wanting what is rightfully theirs, they go after it. We'll go Lisa and then Mark.
Well, it's important that these people were accountable so the king would not be defrauded.
Yeah.
And the administrators kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. They couldn't find corruption, where he was trustworthy. There was no negligence, which negligence is just something that happens to most people because you just take your eye off the ball.
Right. Well,
But
let
even-
me just add a phrase to that. Isn't negligence the thing we find comfort in, knowing that it was an unintentional sin that we committed?
Well,
and
no,
God
because it
covers
still
that?
has the same repercussions.
Well, right, but we have that idea where he says there's the unintentional sin, and I'm going to give you a way to get through that. And so we have this idea here that it's what was the word you drew out there? Where did it go?
Well,
Okay.
still sin.
Yeah.
But they couldn't even find that in him, no corruption. So a lot of the problem is that they can find it in themselves or among themselves, but they couldn't find it in Daniel.
Yeah, he was beyond refute. I mean, there was nothing they could bring a charge against him as part of the kingdom and the king's laws. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, it's just new king, complete different. Well, it's just the way he's reacting is different than the last king.
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to make you the next. You're going to command everything.
Yeah.
And I think God is just saying, you guys, you humans are just so fickle.
Yes.
You'll do one thing, one guy will do one thing, the next guy, even in the Judean kings, the next guy, Manasseh was the guy who ended everything for them.
Yeah.
And that is a really scary thing to see. And then I see these numbers and things, and I try not to get down that rabbit hole, but I see numbers and I start seeing things about the 3 and the 120, and which is 12 times 10, all of those, and the meanings behind all that.
Yeah. Maybe we can get into that next week a little bit when we have some more time to evolve into that. But yeah, I mean, I like your comment about seeing this change of leadership, and it's a new way of doing it. It's a whole different empire. It's a whole different king. It's a whole different set of people in charge. And let's put that then in context with what happened at the end of chapter 5. Belshazzar promised Daniel glory as being third in charge. And as soon as Belshazzar gives it to him, it's taken away from Daniel. Daniel's put in a position of power and authority as a trusted advisor, as someone who's given, and then it's ripped out from under him, and he has to work his way back up the ranks again. But Darius sees the spirit that the others saw. Darius values this spirit within him, whereas mankind was not valuing that. And it just creates this turbulence in the narrative of Daniel's physical life, but it shows you the consistency of how Daniel acts and the benefit that that brings him, even through trials, right? Miss Kay, then Michi, then Lito.
Well, I think it's very interesting that they could only find fault with him in connection with the law of his God. And how wonderful it would be if we are all like that. If the only way somebody could find something against us is with the way we are with the law of God.
Yes. Yeah, but what I find interesting about that, it's a beautiful point you're making, Kay. Here they say, we're not going to find a complaint unless we find it with the law of his God, right? Now, we'll see that what they were hoping for was that, look, he's ignoring his own laws. These laws he's not even upholding. He's doing something wrong, or this law of his is calling him to go against our laws. They couldn't find that. There was nothing that they could find. And so they have to manufacture it. But how foolish is mankind that they think, I can find something wrong with the law of God. And that's what they're trying to do. I'm trying to find something in connection with the law of his God. I'm going to show that his laws are wrong, that there's something that's going to subvert this kingdom that we're a part of. And they can't. Because there's absolutely nothing wrong with the law of God. It is perfect, right? Converting the soul. Go ahead, Michi.
I just have a question. So, Belshazzar was killed, and then now Darius is in charge. They never was like, hey, you're in charge because this is what happened with this guy Daniel. So they don't know anything about Daniel at all. They were just like, hey, you're king now. They didn't say why or anything.
So, yeah, I mean, when you think through kingdoms conquering other kingdoms, you wouldn't walk in and instantly go, hey, you have power in this kingdom. I trust you to have power in my kingdom. Mm-hmm. Right? I've conquered you. Now I need to test you whether you're going to be loyal to my kingdom or not. So they don't give the power to all the wise men of Babylon. They don't give that glory to them immediately. But what happens is Daniel gets raised up in the ranks because of his spirit and the way he conducts himself. Darius sees the value in that and raises him up.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if his story would still carry on to those still now that he's taken over.
I'm sure that once there was time to learn who these people are, Daniel and the others in the kingdom, there was likely knowledge of what Daniel had done before. But when you have a king from outside of the territory, kingdoms don't really talk, right? Unless it's like political discussions. But you don't go in and blend and talk about how awesome, these two kingdoms are between each other as much. So those stories wouldn't have carried as far as we would expect them. They wouldn't be on headlines, right? So, all right, Lito, and then Mark had a thought.
It just seems so interesting to me that, this sceneries of jealousy and trying to finding fault, as we have mentioned. It reminds me of the futuristic things that happens in the future with Jesus. Same thing that they're trying to find fault. The crowds try to find fault.
Yep.
Even Pilate and Herod tried to find the things that are not. They tried to succumb with the crowds as well.
Yeah.
And it finds me interesting that this written in the happened in the old times, and futuristically at the time of Jesus it happens again.
Yes, absolutely. And also within Daniel, this phrasing, they sought to find a ground for complaint. What should that be What are they? What this should ring out as you've been reading Daniel already? What should this remind us of? We said this chapter parallels another. I don't need the mic, but yeah. Okay, yeah, certainly looking forward, as Lito said, calling or trying to call, words. Trying to charge Jesus with blasphemy, accuse him. But within Daniel, Daniel chapter 3, verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They had no official reason to be accusing them. They maliciously did it, and here we see the same narrative. So it's part of what's happening here is chapter 6 is opening up and going, hey, we've seen this already. Do you know the ending? You know, it's wanting you to already see where this is going. And so he's opening that up with that idea. Mark.
Just to address why I think this king likes him, that and one other thing.
Sure.
Paul says, he shows in Galatians 5 that walking by the Spirit, showing love and patience and all those things, there is no law. And that's always been true, even now, even in this time. And this is how he's living his life. So what can they do? Well, this is politics, like you say. And politics ruins everything. If you want to get depressed, go watch the news and listen to some politics.
Amen.
But what's happening here is that word, the complaint, they're not looking to just complain, oh, we don't like him. The word is ilah, which means let's create the pretext.
Yeah.
Let's make up something. So the thing that they're going to find is something that he has to do with his God. We still see this today, even in today's politics. Let's make up the law. We've just seen the corruption within our own court system creating something out of thin air against somebody.
Sure.
It never changes.
Right.
People are still the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I want us to look at verse 4 and this statement. They found no fault, complaint, no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. To what? Mark. Let's get Mark the microphone.
I looked at that as well. He was faithful to the king and the kingdom. Again, because he's just, when you're honest, you're faithful to whoever it is.
Yeah.
And that's how I see him.
Yeah, certainly from their perspective, he's faithful. To the king and the kingdom, he's not done anything against it. He's not given any reason for them to charge him. Physically, this kingdom he's been found faithful to. We have Scott up here, if you would, Jay.
Yeah, I like that you see this over and over again, but he is good to wherever he is. He's good to his conquerors.
Yeah.
And just imagine that. If you would have an attitude toward anyone, who would that be, right? Yeah. These are the people that took your nation, that took you into captivity. Now you've got another set of conquerors. But he's been good to all of them.
Yes.
And I like some of the wording. He's there so that the king would suffer no loss.
Right.
He's also shown that he's been proven to hold that charge, and that I think it's why he rose to the top. I bet he's already been pointing out things that would have been bad had they carried on.
Right.
And he could have allowed those things to happen, because I don't really like this king anyways. They're not my king.
Possibly even leading the Jewish people to be faithful.
As a revolt or something.
So when
as
you opposed to being a revolting nation.
It's like what Mark was saying is just the character needs to be, we're good to everyone.
Yeah.
And then that is what God is calling us to do whenever we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Aubriana.
I just thought it was interesting, the wording in verse 5 where it says they won't find any grounds for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. That word, the law, is very interesting, especially, this is jumping forward a little bit, but it gives us something to look forward to next week.
Yeah.
They have Darius sign this decree, and over, I think 3 times, it says, you know that the law of the Medes and the Persians is unchangeable.
Right.
And so now we have this, the law of God versus the law of the Medes and the Persians.
Good.
And we'll see which one comes out on top in the end.
Yeah.
Because as we've seen throughout Daniel, it's these false kingdoms,
Right.
versus the true kingdom of God.
Right. Absolutely. Kristen, and that'll wrap us up for this morning.
Just one other thing to add, going along with that context, is that the only way that they were going to find fault with Daniel was to put Daniel's God in opposition with the king. So if he disobeys God, then his testimony is ruined.
Yes.
And his integrity and his character. If he disobeys the land of the law, then that puts him going against the king,
Right.
which he's been faithful to. So something, as Mark was talking about, that us as humans still do today is this thing called thought control. And something I came across is when sins aren't crimes and crimes aren't sins. So in some places it's illegal to smack a child in disciplining them.
Yeah.
But it's legal to kill the unborn. And so we see that this thought control is that we can't discipline our children physically, but it's okay to kill the unborn.
Sure. Yeah, and ultimately, as you pointed out here, these men are trying to test, who are you truly faithful to? Are you going to be faithful to your God, Daniel? Or are you going to be faithful to the laws of this land, as Aubriana pointed out, and be faithful to the king who is appointing you to this high position? All right, we'll pick up there next week in Daniel chapter 5. Thank you for your attention and comments. Really appreciate it.